This episode of the PC Perspective Podcast is brought to you by Molekule, the world's first molecular air purifier that reduces symptoms for allergy and asthma sufferers. For $75 off your first order, visit molekule.com and use promo code PCPER at checkout. That's molekule.com and promo code PCPER.
Hello and welcome to the PC Perspective Podcast. This is episode 531, being recorded on February 6, 2019. I'm Sebastian Peak.
I'm Jeremy Hellstrom. I'm Josh Walrath.
And I'm Jim Tanis.
And though this is being recorded on February 6, it is being released after the embargo is up for what we were about to talk about, which is the much...
What are we going to talk about?
Josh,
nothing's happening. I'm asking what you're talking about.
Okay. Remember a month ago...
Could you wait? Okay.
Let me take you back, Josh.
Would you just tell me?
Let me take you back to... it was an exceptionally clement day in Las Vegas, Nevada. I awoke from a deep slumber to the sounds of Dr. Lisa Su presenting on stage a brand new graphics card produced at the 7nm node. So today is, well, when you're listening to this, it will be at least the 7th of February. And that is very important because Radeon VII, the world's first 7nm GPU for gaming, is released. And we can talk about it. We can talk about performance. We've been able to show the card and talk about the fact we've been benchmarking it for the last 3 days. Now we can finally share performance numbers with you. So what is it? Just to give you a brief high-level overview, essentially, this is the same architecture as the previous high-end GPU from AMD, which was Vega 64, based on the Vega 10 GPU. And what they've done is they've taken that down from 14 nanometers to 7 nanometers, which reduces the die from 495 millimeters squared down to 331 millimeters squared. And whether you keep track of die sizes or not, the reason it's really important here is because they can add on the same package. Is it a package, Josh? Please enlighten me. It's the die proper. Is it still a die? And then there's the GPU die on die?
Okay, well, no, it's the GPU die. It's the memory dies.
And this is on an interposer?
Interposer. Yeah.
And what is the whole thing called? Like this whole
module?
Okay. Like this thing that's in the right here. This is what we're
I'd call that I'd just call that a module.
A module? Okay.
Yeah.
I always called this the die, and I realized that I was wrong because the die is inside here.
Yeah.
Okay. So because there's extra space on the module, they've added...
Well, there's extra space on the interposer. You can add more memory chips to make the same sized module.
Okay.
But so you've got double the memory and double the bandwidth.
That's true. See, you stole my thunder because when they added double the memory, they did it on 2 more 32 gigabit packages, these stacks of 4 gigabytes of high bandwidth memory 2, HBM2. So now it has 16 gigabytes of HBM2, which is not only running slightly faster, but it's running with the fattest memory pipe that, we've ever seen, because it's 2 gigabit per second HBM2 times 4, so 4096 bit memory. That's the same memory bus width that we saw with R9 Fury X back in the day. And now here it is with HBM2 running faster with just this is a terabyte of memory bandwidth. So that's not the only change, because they have also greatly increased the clock speed. So we went from a base clock of 1274 with Vega 64, the air-cooled version. The liquid-cooled version was around 1400 megahertz base. And then this is 1450 megahertz base. So you're already ahead of that kind of special, more premium liquid-cooled version of the Vega 64 that AMD actually used to sell, and I think it's been discontinued for a while. It's pretty rare. I was actually looking around eBay for one the other day just to see what they're going for, and they're going for a lot of money. And the peak engine clock, which is a new term for AMD, it's based on workload. Their peak engine clock target for this is 1800 megahertz. And the regular boost GPU clock is 1750. So it's clocked very aggressively. The boost clock on Vega 64 was only 1546. Still has 64 ROPS, but the change is the fact that this is a slightly cut down version of the Vega 20 GPU. The full version is available with their professional compute card, the Instinct MI60. That has 64 next gen compute units. This has 60. So if you were looking on paper, like in between the Vega 56 and the Vega 64 is this card, but this is in no way hampered by its having 4 compute units disabled, as we'll see. So very, very aggressive amount of memory. I know that's one of the topics of discussion, or will be one of the topics of discussion from AMD as this is launching, is making use of all of that memory. And it's more than just gaming. They have emphasized since this was announced on stage that this is kind of a dual purpose card. This is for content creation and gaming. And some of the things you can do with that much fast memory and an enhanced core, which is essentially the same architecture, just faster. No new like graphical features that I'm aware of. They've been pretty tight-lipped about details on the architecture. So I can only assume that we can reference kind of like the MI50, which is its closest, the closest professional card to this. Many of the same specs, just lower clocks. So, and similar power. And I talked to you, Josh, earlier in the week about, you know, what can they do when they shrink the die down? They went from 14 nanometers to 7 nanometers. That gave them a bigger power envelope. And when you do a die shrink, you have options, right?
Well, yeah, it's you know, the biggest, of course, is you're shrinking the die significantly, which allows you to get all that extra crap on the interposer, because the interposer can only be so big as well. And so you've got you know, more dies per wafer. You have a better chance of having better yields overall. We don't know about bins, but when you go to, you know, obviously a lower, smaller process node, you're going to get some advantages. And in this case, you're going to get some power and speed advantages. Maybe not as much as you used to, but AMD, when they redesigned this, I mean, it was redesigned for 7 nanometers. It wasn't a total redesign. They took the basic thing. It's almost like a pipe cleaner for a large GPU to make sure they got everything right. They have a working product on 14 nanometer. They take that, they use the correct libraries and whatnot to lay out the design and see if it works. I mean, they've done that in the past, and pipe cleaners have worked pretty well, because it's not as much fun when you have a brand new product on a brand new process node. Usually there are some issues that, you know, you're going to have as compared to having a die that works on even a larger process node, but you can shrink that down and make sure it, you know, it works. And it's you cut out a lot of the uncertainty of why it's not working. And so usually it's pretty aggressive to see somebody do a new design on a new process node. So AMD kind of used Vega to do this. And initially, like you said, they were going to only do the enterprise versions and workstation type stuff with Vega 7 or you know, Vega 20 was the official name for the GPU. Yeah. But yeah, you know, it's not perfect though, because they're still running at 300 watts TDP. It's a pretty hot package there.
Yeah, I would assume that a lot of that is a function of just being so aggressive on clocks. I mean, if they had come out with the same specs as Vega 64 at 7 nanometers, I assume we'd be down below like 250 watts, 220 watts. Closer to where the Vega 56 was.
Yeah, but I mean they also had to add a bunch of transistors for the memory. That's double
true.
The memory.
Transistor count is up.
Yeah, and also probably some others to get everything running and at the clock speeds that they want on the process node. So the process node is not going to inherently give you, well, it's going to be to its part. I mean, if you're looking at just pure transistor performance, you're going to get an increase in clock speed. But that's per transistor. It's not per product. You start throwing 13 billion transistors at a process and you're going to run into issues. And then that's where design comes in and gives you a better experience than, just doing a dumb shrink. What else do you want to know?
Yeah. Well, I have more questions, but we'll get to the gaming benchmarks briefly. You can read the full review at pcper.com to see all of the charts. But right off the bat, I only tested at 1440 and at 4K. I assume that no one is spending $699 on a graphics card, which is the launch price for this product, and playing at 1080p. I mean, if you are, more power to you. But I don't know why you'd need 16 gigabytes of memory to do that. Anyhow, Time Spy 3D Mark was the first thing I ran when I unboxed this card. And that's actually a DirectX 12 1440p gaming benchmark. And right off the bat, I saw a performance that was in between an RTX 2070 and an RTX 2080. And the RTX 2080, at least with synthetics, had a pretty big lead. And I did Unigine superposition benchmark also at 1440 high settings. Once again, in between the RTX 2070 and 2080. But shifting things over to actual games, I decided why not look first at the games that are traditionally better optimized to run on AMD hardware than not. And so two of them that came to mind.
You got the Quake 2 3D Now executable. And
I consider this a huge miss. We talked about this earlier. I'm kicking myself. We could have been the only outlet covering the games that matter the most. We could have done like Quake 2, Quake 3 Arena, multiplayer graphics performance testing. We could have done like Wolfenstein
Free Space 2.
Quake 2 RTX. At least do Quake 2 RTX.
Was that really a thing? I'm sorry, I don't know.
It is. But
yeah,
I'm thinking you're making like an RTX on joke, and I was missing it. Like
no. Actually, somebody did recompile the Quake 2 executable to support RTX, and it apparently runs like 60 to 70.
Yes, that Vulkan. What was it called? Q2 VKPT.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yep. Something ridiculously long like that. And otherwise, ray trace
path tracing. Yes, I still haven't installed that. I was busy reviewing things. Hopefully we have a quiet month coming up so that I don't have to do this all week. But anyway, back to the results. We went with Ashes of the Singularity escalation first. Because I wanted to see, like, what can this card do with software that's optimized for Radeon graphics to start with? And lo and behold, it was number one. It beats out the RTX 2080 at high settings, 2560 by 1440. And it does it by about 3 or 4 FPS. So it's not like neck and neck. It's actually got a little bit of a lead. And while it was a little bit less consistent with frame times than the RTX 2080, which is very smooth in that game, oddly smooth. Like every other game shows like stuttering, or every other card shows stuttering with that game that I've tested. And this was no exception, but it was like the second best performance and the highest frame rate of any card I've tested so far with the game. So then I moved on to Far Cry 5, another game with the AMD logo that should be a little bit better optimized. And again, great performance, great showing, not in first place, but within like 4 or 5 FPS of the 2080. So they're kind of neck and neck. They're trading blows right off the bat. I'm like, this is going to be a really interesting day. I did all the 1440 testing on one day, and I did all the 4K testing the next day. And that was pretty much the last time it was going to win at 1440 with just this small sample of games that I have that I've been testing recently. I didn't have time to start from scratch and do all new games at every resolution and the 3 times per run and all the other stuff that I do here. But F1 2018, that's a DirectX 11 title. It's kind of showing its age a little bit, but at the high preset. actually very, very good frame rates, and the smoothest performance I've seen from any card that I've tested with this game so far in the last like month of nothing but GPU testing that I've been doing. So another great showing there. I mean, it was behind the 2080, but it was only behind by like 9 frames, and it was way ahead of the 2070. So Middle Earth, Shadow War, kind of the same thing. And I'll kind of skip ahead. Shadow of the Tomb Raider. That was the one where I knew that's going to be kind of a controversial pick. You're reviewing an AMD graphics card, and this is a game that's got like NVIDIA GameWorks optimizations. And the only one that I know of for sure is Hair. I don't know what else under the hood is going on as far as NVIDIA optimizations, but apparently there might be something, because not only was this not in first place, it was actually all the way behind a GTX 1080 at 1440 high. So, I mean, not much. It was basically tied with the GTX 1080. But that's not obviously what you want to see from the new flagship for AMD. And this is probably the like worst case scenario. And I'm sure people will be pointing fingers to the fact that this was even tested. But it is what it is. It's a game that's out there. It's popular. I've used it for the other reviews that I've done. And I thought, hey, I'll just see how the Radeon does with this game. And it turns out not very well. And a game that has received a lot of criticism from, I think, Radeon fans is Final Fantasy 15, which absolutely makes use of a whole bunch of NVIDIA technology, but only if it's enabled, obviously. So at the standard preset, none of that is enabled. And this, as far as I know, and this card is once again up in second place. So kind of the story of 1440, and as it turns out, the card in general, is that it pretty much performs somewhere in between a RTX 2070 and an RTX 2080. However, and this is why it's kind of like just sort of the beginning, I'm just testing with the same settings I've been testing. And I have intentionally used settings in the past to not exclude cards that only have like 4 or 6 gigabytes of memory. I completely gave up on 4 gigabytes. Now we're in the 6 gigabyte and up world. The AMD cards, even at the low end, you can get a $200 card with 8 gigabytes of memory. The lowest end, some of the lower end cards in the mid range anyway, are coming with like 6 or 8 gigabytes of memory. So you can enable higher textures. You can run at higher resolutions without that huge penalty of hitting the wall with video RAM. However, the trend has been for more and more video RAM to be required over time. And AMD, in their slide deck, like the information they shared with the press, they were showing kind of this trend line of how over time you're going to need more and more video RAM. And obviously they're proud of the 16 gigabyte total, and they want to show it off and they want to justify it. And there are ways that you can make full use of that. And we'll talk a little bit about compute after gaming, but in gaming, one of the things that you can do is run at higher resolutions, higher textures. And the card did a little bit better overall at 4K, or I call it 4K. It's, UHD 3840 by 2160, but it was closer. If you look at the benchmark results on the site, when you read the review, you will see that, it was in like Shadow of the Tomb Raider, worst case scenario at 1440. It was just behind a 2070 at 2160. And it had completely leapfrogged not only the 1080, but the 2060 and the Vega 64, which did really well in that game at 4K. Suddenly, it's like right behind the RTX cards at the top. So it seems that the more you push at this card, the better it responds. And it has probably something to do with all of that memory bandwidth available to it and all of that video RAM, where you just are never going to hit a wall no matter how high resolution you go. You could run games at 8K. It might be a slideshow if you're trying to do 8K Ultra, because the GPU technology just cannot handle that with the current generation, even if you have the video memory for it. But you're never going to be limited, at least in this generation, or possibly even into the next generation, by video RAM, because you have so much. Have we ever had, in any generation, a consumer graphics card with 16 gigabytes of memory?
Well, what was NVIDIA's first interposer-based one? That had 16 gigs on there, I think, and up to 32 gigs. But that was a $10,000 card.
Right. Yeah, that was a professional card. And I know there have been before. Obviously, the closest cousin to this, other than the new Instinct, which obviously is using the same die, the Instinct MI50 is essentially the same, but this is like the more aggressively clocked, probably higher bend version of that. But the Frontier Edition came to mind. Frontier Edition was the full Vega 10 GPU, all 64 compute engines enabled, 16 gigabytes of HBM, and in many ways, kind of the predecessor to this card. And I think, honestly, this is a successor to that card as far as like a prosumer, like GPU compute user, somebody who would want one of these to do things like OpenCL acceleration. You're getting a better value at $699. That was $1,000 when it launched, and I believe still is $1,000. So if you don't need all of the professional level features and you don't need the professional drivers, you can do a lot with this card with compute. And I will just briefly touch on that because they showed some slides and I did some of my own testing just to kind of, just in good faith to validate. And for example, LuxMark 3.1, the current version, the Lux Ball HDR demo that everybody uses for OpenCL performance, and the score for this thing is off the chart compared to Vega 64. And I actually dragged out the Vega 64 liquid cooled version that I inherited, and that thing is a fantastic card, by the way. I was like amazed. I'm like running it at full board. I can barely hear it because the 120 millimeter fan spins so slowly. And it's clocked so much more aggressively than any of the air-cooled Vega 64 cards are. And still, with the gains you get from the liquid-cooled version at the higher clocks, with full Vega 10, with all 64 compute engines, this Radeon VII blows it away with, like in the LuxMark demo, Blender, I ran like the BMW test, significantly lower, like 94 seconds compared to 113.5 seconds. So it's very, very good compute performance. And one of the things that was emphasized was what you could do with things like 8K video. And even though 8K video sounds kind of ridiculous, one of the things that I was learning when we were at CES is that a lot of video professionally shot at 8K, certainly shot above 4K, because you want to be able to frame the video after the fact. You want to be able to do crops within a frame, or downsample to get rid of noise in a darker scene, or do panning effects across a frame without having to go and reshoot something or take something out of a frame. So when you're dealing with that much, like that high a resolution, it actually starts to make a lot of sense, where there are workloads where you're easily eclipsing 8, 9, 10, 11 gigabytes of video memory if you're using OpenCL acceleration in like Adobe Creative Cloud. And they were showing gains of, it's like 1.29x is what they were showing over Vega 64 with Adobe Premiere 8K, which is better still than what the RTX 2080 is able to do by a small percentage. But the LuxMark gains are probably the biggest, most impressive ones I saw. But
I think that it would be interesting to do some more testing on memory bandwidth and memory size, because if you think about it, I mean, it's got 64 ROPs. Some of the, NVIDIA stuff has far more ROPs. And so that's just, basic painting pixels on the screen that's running up to 144 hertz. And so that's a lot of pixels at 2K or 4K at, 60 hertz. And so since ROPs are typically really closely associated with the memory controllers, you're doubling the memory controllers, you're lowering the contention that ROPs potentially have with each other for that memory bandwidth. And ROPs are, from what I understand, are typically pretty memory bandwidth hungry, because you've got to they write that data to memory, and then its access goes to the frame buffer and pushed out to the monitor, and it's just the video controller. Sorry,
Yeah.
And it seems like that's where you see some real improvements, and especially when you start talking about professional stuff. Boy, you just have such a larger, wider base of because even though these GPUs have pretty good amount of caches, it's not a huge amount of cache per compute unit.
No, it's not.
And so they still utilize a lot of main memory.
That's a great segue, because that's what I was going to ask you. My next ultra technical question. I was studying the Vega architecture a little bit before completing the review, just trying to look for any areas where they might have done some enhancements, because they referred to some enhancements and some reduced latency, but I wasn't getting any specific details. One of the things about Vega 10 was it had doubled over the previous architecture, I believe Fiji. It had doubled the L2 cache from 2 to 4 megabytes, which backfeeds the ROPS, I believe.
Well,
I just wondered if there was any increase to the speed or reduction in latency to that L2 cache, or even if they had actually increased the L2 cache, you could get
the L1 and L2 cache are more closely associated with the cores, the compute cores.
Okay.
They're not so much with the ROPS. ROPS have, I think, a limited amount, very, very small amount of local memory to them, but they don't access L1 and L2 nearly as much as the compute cores do. And so in a lot of their operations,
could be why they are getting such improvements from compute, then, I imagine, and not necessarily like pixel fill rate or texture fill rate. Well, I would assume, I haven't seen the numbers, but because for some reason it wasn't on their chart, but I assume this still has 256 texture units, because the previous architecture did as well.
It could be less, because depending on where they associate the texture units, if they have the texture units just adjacent to the compute cores, well, there's fewer compute cores, and so you're going to have fewer texture units, probably, because that's typically where it makes more logical sense to have texture units where it's actually doing pixel processing rather than near the ROPS.
Okay. Well, we can discuss this at length, but I'll just move along. Basically, the final thoughts that I had, and I'll briefly touch on like power consumption. Like this still has a 300 watt TDP. It's in normal gaming workloads, you're not going to get there. This was consuming less power than even my overclocked ASUS ROG Strix, like gaming Vega 64. That thing, I think, under load is somewhere in like the 350 to 375 watt at the wall total system draw. We're talking about the whole system back here, which has like an overhead of around 75 watts between processor and everything else while it's running. So at load. So this from the wall, normal gaming load, one of my benchmarks was pulling, what was it? 314 watts. That's what I have here. So, the actual board was pulling, when I was looking at some of the logs, was pulling like 220, 230 watts. So, I mean, I could push it a lot harder, and that was not 4K. So, I mean, it's pushing much higher resolutions. You'd be getting closer to the board power limits, but I feel like there is headroom here. And the cooler is the default fan profile definitely favors thermals over noise. Because even though,
I mean, those temperatures are amazing.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Like I had thought that Strix Vega 64 was kind of overkill, like that big triple fan cooler, and it's like a 3-slot design, and under load it keeps it like 63C. Like, you don't really need to run it at 63C. I guess that gives you overclocking headroom, but this card was running at 59C, and the room was like a degree cooler, so I guess we could just call it 60. But that's just crazy. And for the most part, even though I was hitting like 44 to 45 decibels, I could, if the card was pushed for a longer period of time, like I could get it all the way up to like 50, and I hit 52 was the highest recorded noise reading. And that sounds loud, but I mean, you talk about like the old blower style designs, and this is nowhere near. Like going with one of these like open air, like triple fan, double or triple fan designs, like has been the trend this generation from NVIDIA and now AMD, is great because all you're hearing is like that air turbulence. You just hear the rush of air against heatsink, and you don't hear any kind of whine, and it's great. So even at 45 decibels, even at 50 decibels, it's not really annoying at all. But those temperatures, you could certainly use a more modest fan profile and still be more than cool enough, or overclock the card, which is something I have not tried to do yet. So I'm boring. I haven't taken the card apart. I haven't peeled off the thermal pads. I haven't used a flathead screwdriver on pentalobe bolts. I haven't done any of the fun stuff everybody else has been doing. But anyway, we have a review. You can read all the details and see all the pictures, and there's a beautiful die shot that AMD provided that I used on the last page.
Not only that, but look at that card behind you.
I know, there it is.
With its with plastic base that's RGB enhanced.
It is RGB enhanced because it's, you know, current year, and it has to be RGB to be relevant. But yeah, I mean, look, it's got a real, and I was actually almost there's a thin piece of plastic over this GPU here. Thought about just like picking it off and pulling the GPU out. But
That's literally like $300 worth of silicon just sitting there.
I wonder if it's like, I'm sure that there's some part of this that's functional. I can't imagine there would be like completely dead die here.
Probably. Otherwise, why would they give it to a guy like you?
Well, I mean, obviously I rate a little bit higher than you do, Josh.
Well, actually, you rate a lot higher than me, but I'm going to
dark
about that later.
I'm sorry. Anyway, let's move on. There's actually more going on, believe it or not. We had another record-setting week at the website. I don't know if that's actually true. I have not been here since the beginning like Jeremy has. But
we can call it a record.
Okay, it was a record. Another week in a row of like 5 or 6 reviews posted. We have a review almost every day of the week.
Well, you know, traffic at the site year over year for January was up 145%.
That's amazing.
Yeah. You know, once we got rid of those losers.
Yeah. Once we got rid of Ken and Alan and that other guy, I can't even remember his name right now. No, I know. If you're watching, Ryan, we love you. But anyway.
But you were a drag on the company.
Yeah, I mean, look what's happened since you've left. Maury is back with a vengeance with motherboard reviews throughout the month of February, I imagine. And the first one is this new ASUS. I struggle with that name after all these years. Tough Z390 Pro Gaming ATX and other superlatives. I looked over this.
You know, at least they don't name them like gigabyte boards.
Yeah, it is easier to pronounce. I'll give you that. And one thing right off the bat, I will just clear the air right now. The CMOS battery placement on this board is, I'm sorry, it's a little questionable. And this is actually something where I used to kind of laugh along with I think some of us when that would come up, and I'm like, you know, it's almost like a punchline. But really, when you put the battery directly under your dual slot cooler graphics card, and you have an overclock that went wrong, horribly wrong, and you need to pull the CMOS battery, now you've got to take your expansion cards out and you've got to get down there. So I can see that. I mean, that's literally one of the only things that Maury could find to even complain about. So this is obviously a very solid solution. And we've seen the Tough series in the past. These were, the brand has kind of changed, but you still have a motherboard with a more robust build and
not as much gray as it used.
You don't have like a full shield over the top. I mean, there is some shielding.
One of the big things was the ceramic based heat sinks that they had for those, that they were, it's kind of the big deal for them. They're, you know, they were robust boards, but they weren't fancy. They didn't have a whole bunch of crap on it, but they were robust.
I also remember them being a lot more expensive in this. Like this is at launch at like $169 price point.
No, that's about where, because I remember back in the day, some of the tough, the 890 series from AMD were launched right around there. It wasn't until you got the Crosshair, or was it Crossfire? I can't remember which ones that were.
AMD used Crossfire for multi GPU, Josh.
Well, yeah, but I'm talking about the
SLI.
No.
Crosshair motherboards.
Yes, I think it was Crosshair. And then they turned into Crosshair Ranger and crap like that. Yeah. No, the 890 Tough and the 990 Tough were, you know, they were less than their high-end boards, but they still had plenty of good features and good cooling. And again,
I point out that inflation causes the price of things to rise over time, Josh. And, you know,
yeah, but the 990 was only 2 years ago.
Well, the other thing, so ASUS has, it's not just that things, I mean, ASUS has explicitly changed the positioning of their Tough series. Tough was, it was that, had that durable characteristic. It had the extra shielding and all that. And it wasn't their top of the line price point, but it wasn't their cheapest board either. Starting this year, ASUS is intentionally moving Tough to sort of their entry level. When we talked to them at CES, they characterized it as like, it's an entry level price, but not entry level, you know, it's greater than entry level features. So it's still got that good solid build quality, not fancy, no extra RGBs, no crazy features, just a good solid board and I think street prices on this are about 150 too. So it's even really cheaper than list. Wow. So,
and I'm looking over the feature list, and this has a lot of that same Tough stuff. Like it's got, let's see, stainless steel back IO, so it's corrosion resistant. It's got land guard, so it's got like the surge protection. It's got the Tough components, so military grade chokes, caps, MOSFETs. So a lot of the same kind of durability type stuff that we've seen in the past. But like you said, it's like no frills. If you have RGB-itis, this might be your answer. Like I love me some, you know, ROG motherboard, but a lot of the newer ones have a lot of like, you know, they have a lot of features that are really useful, and they have a lot of features that are kind of extra. If you're looking to kind of pare down, you just want something that's going to be reliable. And like I said, Maury, very impressed with the board. He hammers on these things, and his testing methodology is very methodical, and also very, like, it's very, very hard on the boards and components. And he does extended overclocking and stress runs, and he found nothing to complain about, except, you know, CMOS battery placement could have been a little lower on the board, but there might be a technical reason for that. I'm not sure. You know what? M.2, I blame it on M.2. I'm looking at this board design. That M.2, which has that shield over it in between the lower two PCI Express, that's where the CMOS battery would have been.
Mm-hmm. It's the only reason it's not there, I'm sure.
Maybe it's time to move away from those CR2032 batteries after, what, 30 years? 20 years? I will say,
but they're so good.
Being a collector of what my wife might consider useless junk, one of my obsessions is like 386 and 486 systems and motherboards and related components and accoutrements. And it's always a crapshoot when you buy a 386 or 486 motherboard, because they usually have those horrible barrel batteries on them that almost all leak. And so even if the pictures on eBay, it looked pretty good, you get it, and just being jostled around in the mail, by the time you actually get the motherboard, the thing has burst and it's leaking all over the board. And I have at least one dead motherboard that I can see right here because of this. So I'll take the CR2032, but I'd like to see a smaller solution. Moving moving on. Another review. This one put up by Chris Koch, who contributes to the site, and he does a lot of keyboards and gaming headsets and mice and gaming peripherals, in other words. And this is the update to the Artemis Spectrum, is what it was called when I reviewed it. I reviewed the G933 and 633 back in the day, and those were fantastic. They were the origin of the Pro G driver, as far as I can remember. And that was a smaller driver. If looking over the specs here, this is a 50 millimeter Pro G. When Pro G launched, it was a smaller driver that still had the really deep bass, but also had a very good frequency response throughout the entire range, and it was a more balanced sound. So I was very impressed.
Flat around the entire thing, right?
Yes.
It wasn't like the old curve where you had the bass and then you had the treble and your mid-range.
Smile.
I like band filters,
I'm not a huge fan of the Smile EQ. Like Josh, you're wearing Grados right now, right? Those are the SR60s or the SR80s?
No, 225s.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm thrown because they use the same design all the way up until you get to the 325.
Correct.
Okay, so the 225s have the much better level matching and better the better bins of the drivers. So with most gaming headsets, you have that kind of scooped EQ, the Smile EQ, like Jeremy said, and these traditionally have not been that way. Chris was very impressed by these. He basically said these are an improvement over that previous generation. I would love to get my hands on these and hear them myself. Of course, there are lighting effects and that sort of thing with this, but you don't have to use those if you don't want to. And that was the case before. My only issue with the 933, 633 design in the past was it's rather large on your head.
Hey, is it big enough to hide an SSD in there? Pretty much. Battery. Scroll just up a bit.
Let's see.
Yeah.
I mean, from that camera angle, it kind of does look like an SSD. I don't think so.
It's not quite that big, but close enough.
But I mean, a removable battery is a wonderful thing.
Yes, it is. And I see that is not soldered in. It's actually got a little connector, and
you can swap it out.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
And these work analog or over USB. This one's wireless, so it's all three. That was my understanding of the last generation of these two. The 633 was wired only. The 933 could go either way, and 935 same kind of deal. But again, new drivers. I'm very curious to read all the details. I've been a little bit busy the last couple of days since this went up, but this was a great idea. I thought about this in the past, but just using SoundCloud, if you go to the website and read the review for microphone quality, he put up some SoundCloud mic samples. So you can listen to the G935 mic. You can listen to the G432, the other more budget gaming headset released along with this one, and hear what that sounds like. And that's something where every manufacturer has had room for improvement over the last few years. The best I've heard so far is Logitech. And I'm curious to see if this one has the same quality. It went up. They actually, from the G933 to, what was it? It's that red one that I've worn a few times on the podcast, the 533 maybe. They drastically improved the microphone quality. So if that's still the case, it's still getting better. I will have to listen to these sound clips. But anyway, check out the review. Chris got that up this week. And very briefly, because I did this one myself, I will cover the Scythe Katana 5, which is a low-cost CPU air cooler. I have at least one more very popular model of cooler. There's a new variant of a certain popular Cooler Master cooler on the market, which is now in a black version with an RGB fan. And that is coming in the short term, but for now, you can content yourself with a cooler review from Scythe. And actually, they're one of my favorite brands for a variety of reasons. Their mounting mechanisms are very robust. Their coolers provide a tremendous amount of performance for the price, always. The Ninja 4 was my favorite air cooler I've ever reviewed. the thing was just a monster, and it's much smaller than solutions from other companies. But this is kind of like a miniature version of one of those. And the only thing I could find to complain about it at all was the mounting mechanism, which is that Intel style clip mechanism. But when you hold this thing, it's so light that it kind of makes sense. Like once I had it attached, it was actually a little bit more secure than the Intel system that you find on their stock coolers, because I was carrying the motherboard around by the cooler and it wasn't falling. So
as the manufacturer recommends.
Yes.
Yes.
So, you know, it's a convenient handle, and that's what it's for. So, very good performance. Anyone who questions the fact that I only compared it against the Katana 5, that's the only cooler I've reviewed recently with the same test setup. So that will be corrected soon. There'll be a lot more on the charts, but for now, if you want to check it out, it's an under $30 cooler. It's coming back into stock in the US this month. Usually Newegg, I think, is the place to find it. Around $28 or so. So in that price range, very, very competitive performance. And I'm curious to see how it stacks up against the new Hyper 212 when I get that tested. And next on the list, this is something that Jim posted, I believe. An OWC dual bay drive dock. Is this USB-C?
Yeah, this is USB-C only, because they have a number of products with this exact same form factor, but just different interfaces. This particular one is just a single USB-C 3.1 Gen 2. So you can go to 10 gigabits on the bandwidth, and it does work at that. I tested it on a Thunderbolt 3 port, and obviously with SATA drives, you're not going to hit that. But if you RAID them together or try to access both simultaneously, I got up to, I think it was 960 megabytes a second of total speed. So on sequential reads. So very fast. The build quality is great. It's this sort of solid aluminum all around the base with plastic on top, and the plastic does scratch a little bit easily because they've got these flaps for the 3.5 inch and 2.25 inch drives. So you're going to get some scratches there because as you insert the drive, it touches the plastic. So that was, possibly a design oversight, but not a huge deal. Independent power.
You get some sick scratches off of it.
I'm sorry?
Would you get some sick scratches off of it?
Sick scratches?
Like sick,
like gnarly?
Scratches.
No,
wiki.
He's talking about like scratching.
Oh, I have no idea. I don't know. Mine didn't sound good. But
it looks, you know what it looks like, Jim? It looks like a Nook. It looks like one of those taller Nooks that accept a 2.5 inch hard drive.
It is. It's bigger than a Nook. It might be closer to like one of the Gigabyte bricks, like the Nook style.
Follow-up question. Can you 3D print different lids for it like you can with a Nook?
Not officially. I'm sure you could probably pry that off and put whatever you wanted on there, but no, it's basically it's a simple, solid, high performance drive dock. Not everyone needs these anymore. This one's expensive. It's $120, so you're going to pay for it. But I was coming from a StarTech based a single drive USB 3.0 device that had finally died, and it was always flaky. It didn't have boot support. This has boot support. It's hot swappable.
Okay.
So it's just a solid all around. Excuse me.
Is it bootable on a Windows system? I imagine you tested this on a Mac from looking.
So it's officially bootable on a Mac. It will boot to an installer. So I installed a Linux installer. I imaged a Linux installer to one of the drives and was able to boot my PC to that. It wouldn't install. So I had two drives in there. I had one that had the installer and one I was going to try to install to. It wouldn't install onto the other drive. So I'm thinking that's the limitation. But if you were to have like an installer on a partition, it booted, at least my X99 based platform booted to it fine. So, flexible in that regard. So if you have dual systems, PCs and Macs and Linux, and it even works on Chrome OS, basically anything that supports drive standards. Just a nice overall platform.
There's so many questions. I'll only ask one though. Is that like a floor? Is that like desk? Do you use like an outdoor table?
This is, let me see if I can turn the screen sharing back on here. This is a, just a table. It's like a, tall, like bar tops height,
Nice.
game table, or, you know, it's
Okay.
it's in our basement. It's, you know, sitting around putting board games and stuff. And
I like it.
yeah.
Wood grain. It's very LGR. Jeremy has been very busy, as always, this week, posting news right and left.
And but before that, though, let's take a quick break. Though we have a sponsor this week from a new sponsor, and it's something I'm very excited to talk about. So let's take a break to talk about that. This episode of the PC Perspective podcast is brought to you by Molekule. Clean air is crucial to a healthy life, especially for those with conditions like asthma or for those who suffer from allergies. And even though there are countless air treatment products on the market with sleek modern designs, the technology at the core of most of these products, HEPA filtration, is decades old. HEPA filtration was first developed in the 1940s, and while it was a significant improvement over other solutions at the time, it hasn't seen any major innovations since then. HEPA-based air filters trap airborne particles above a certain size. This means two things. First, those allergens, mold, bacteria, and viruses remain in your home while trapped in the filter, while the rest of the air you breathe passes through them. And second, HEPA filters are ineffective at stopping the particles that are small enough to make it through the filter. This is where Molekule comes in. The company has introduced a breakthrough science that is finally capable of destroying air pollutants at a molecular level. Molekule calls it PICO technology. That's photoelectrochemical oxidation. And it not only captures those harmful airborne particles, but also eliminates them, including particles up to 1,000 times smaller than those that can be stopped by a HEPA filter. Molekule's unique technology can therefore make a real difference for allergy and asthma sufferers, resulting in a significant reduction in symptoms. One customer reported that after using Molekule in her home, she was able to breathe through her nose for the first time in 15 years. Molekule's technology has been funded by the EPA, extensively tested by real people, and verified by third parties, such as researchers from the University of South Florida Center for Biological Defense and the University of Minnesota Particle Calibration Laboratory. And Molekule's advanced technology on the inside is matched by a clean, modern design on the outside. With a sleek aluminum shell, Molekule looks great in any room. It's also easy to use and maintain, and the company offers a convenient subscription service to deliver new filters right to your doorstep exactly when you need them. Don't go another day without having the air in your home be as clean as it can be. Get $75 off your first order by visiting molekule.com and using promo code PCPER at checkout. That's molekule.com and promo code PCPER. We thank Molekule for its support of the PC Perspective podcast and for helping us all breathe cleaner, healthier air. All right, well, back to the show, and we were talking, Jeremy has some news for us.
Yes. Well, okay, Jeremy, among the stories that you posted that I put on this list, it doesn't seem like a big deal. You know, we have driver updates all the time. NVIDIA's latest driver update is a little bit different, right?
Well, I mean, in that this is specifically designed for the RTX laptops that we're about to start seeing, which is kind of nice. And I was sort of thinking, you know, I haven't seen many reviews, but apparently there are 80 different providers or 80 different SKUs we're going to be seeing in the very near future. So you're going to be seeing them.
Yeah, and the big thing too is, I mean, I'm sure part of this is that this is the driver that finally enables DLSS support, at least so far in the 3D Mark Port Royal demo or benchmark, which is kind of like related. I had put these stories together, but this is the driver that enables it. That if you have the benchmark, you can run now on your RTX cards. But DLSS makes so much more sense for laptops, just like it makes a lot of sense for the RTX 2060. If you don't have just the raw horsepower, you don't have as many like tensor cores, then DLSS is like the secret sauce that it makes ray tracing possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so it obviously makes a lot of sense for notebooks. And then Scott had posted news, I believe last night. We were talking in the chat about DLSS and kind of what it is and how it works. And if you read NVIDIA's
deep learning,
and they're doing all the heavy lifting on the back end, and they're creating. It almost strikes me a little bit like HDR, because they're creating data that between the game and which has been created for and the driver, if you enable it, then the way that the game is actually rendered changes. The way that what you see on your screen is the result of basically like it shows like a scene that has no anti-aliasing. Then it shows one that has like 64 times anti-aliasing, and it goes back and forth. And it's like, this is what it looks like with, this is what it looks like without. And it teaches the computer, like, this is how anti-aliasing looks. And then what it's able to do is create that without the performance penalty. But more importantly than this, and I can't remember which outlet did the like sort of investigative report into DLSS, like trying to figure out like what is the actual internal resolution that it's rendering at. I think it might have been Tom's Hardware. They looked at it, and it's something like it's like a 50% lower, perhaps, somewhere in there. We don't know the exact numbers. Like it's 1700 something for 2560. But what it's able to do is internally render in a more like GPU friendly way, and then use all of this AI training from deep learning to actually output a higher resolution than was actually internally rendered. And it looks great, but you have much, much higher frame rates than you would if you were actually running just RTX cores, like the tensor cores on RTX, like all in hardware. So this is kind of, right now, I think Port Royal is the only thing that has this enabled. But Shadow of the Tomb Raider is one. I know it's coming. Well, of course, Battlefield 5 has been like the poster child for ray tracing since the launch of the RTX cards. But DLSS support was the thing we were waiting on that would actually make it more feasible on hardware that isn't the absolute highest end and gets you those much, much higher frame rates. Like Port Royal, the performance goes up 50% with DLSS versus standard AA with ray tracing. So I can't wait to actually try it out myself. I have the hardware. I just need to download the latest version. Let's see here. Something interesting Tim posted.
Hey, Josh, do you know why a Raven Ridge is like a bread box?
Because it's bigger than one?
This one isn't.
So it is the size of a bread box. You can actually fit 2 loaves of bread in there, therefore making it a bread box.
I feel like this is smaller than a bread box. Have you?
It will fit in a bread box.
Have you handled a Mini-STX system?
No.
It's 5x5. It was the Intel 5x5 thing. Yep. I know they showed it at one of the trade shows years ago. It was sub Mini-ITX, and at the time it was an Intel platform. I think it was around the time that the Nook came out. Might be completely wrong.
So well after BTX, right?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Long after BTX. I mean, the total size of this enclosure is about 6x6x3. And you can build a Mini-STX system in something that, I mean, it's bigger than a Nook, but it's, configurable. You can throw in your own processors. You can put desktop processors in these things.
Okay, for the audio listeners, maybe we should just stop here and just clarify what we're talking about.
Yes. Because
we jumped right into the jokes.
The voice of reason. All right, Jim, what are we talking about?
So it's ASRock has a they call it the DeskMini A300, which is a bare bones Mini-STX form factor in PC or enclosure, or I guess it's a bare bones system.
Yeah, it's the case and motherboard. Case
and motherboard, yep.
And I imagine power supply. I guess I could.
Oh, it's got to be.
Yeah. Well, it's external, so yeah, 19-volt power brick. So, kind of the same idea as thin Mini-ITX, where you have the external power, but it's even smaller than that.
Wow, you can't fit very much bread in that.
No, I mean you could fit a slice of bread in it.
Well, you can do multiple slices.
No.
And then if
it's thin slice, okay. Texas
4
toast
would be toast. Yeah, 2 Texas toasts maybe.
Wonder Bread compresses very well.
It does.
That's cheating, though. Okay, mom's
Eat much
homemade bread with the
My-
really thick crust.
My mother never made bread.
Okay,
And besides, then you're slicing it on your own, so it's all relative.
sure.
That's true.
Which your mom is a relative.
All right. Anyway, the interesting thing about this that we haven't even, well, Jeremy tried to steer us in the right direction. This is not an Intel system. This is a Mini-STX system that's for AMD CPUs, specifically AMD APUs or AMD Ryzen CPUs with graphics, like the 2200G, 2400G, I imagine, would be popular for this. It's AM4. And you're going to be limited to this 120 watt total unless you supply your own higher powered 19 volt power brick, which is of course possible. I don't know what the board can actually handle, but it's just interesting to me. Like, I love the idea of choice when it comes to the small form factor, because for years and years, and I've done a number of mini PC reviews over the last 5 years, I would get a mini PC, and the first thing people want to know about it is what's like HD and or even 4K video performance like. Can you game on it? Like, is this something you can use as an HD PC? And very often these were more along the lines of that kind of terminal computer that you see at like banks and libraries, where it'll get you online and you can run a browser, but very, very slow eMMC storage, and you like crave the ability to put like a faster processor in it, because a lot of these are coming with very, very low power, like 3 to 6 watt processors that are like dual core. So to be able to throw in your own like 65 watt processor into one of these enclosures and actually be able to use your own storage, this could be a great alternative to a standard desktop if you don't need expansion slots. So just another option. And they've done these before, like these smaller desk minis. I don't believe this is ASRock's first, but something to look at. Apparently $119. So you get the case, you get the power supply, motherboard, $119. So a little bit cheaper than those shuttle systems that, that used to be like the small form factor bare bones go-to. They still are around, but this is far less expensive. Speaking of things that are expensive,
Thank the Lord you showed that instead of what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm. And why didn't they charge $3,175 for it?
I don't know.
And they're so close at this point.
Here's the thing. We're talking about the thing we haven't introduced yet, and Jim, I'm sure, is like shaking his head right now. His hands are probably covering his face. I'm not sure. I can't see him right now. Anyway, Intel's 28-core Xeon W3175X. We talked about this last week. It's their mammoth 255-watt workstation processor, only available from system integrators that develop purpose-built desktop workstations, was the actual copy from Intel. And lo and behold, it shows up on Newegg. And then I was seeing on Twitter, like there was a shop in Japan that had it like in hand. It's in actual retail packaging. The Newegg images, the product shows not available, but the product listing is there, has their own images, and the box even shows that it has the what is that program called? Like the overclockers insurance from Intel. Let's click on this and actually look. So they still have all the pictures up. The includes the performance tuning protection plan coverage. So, and now it doesn't say not available, it just says auto notify. So this will be in stock, and it's listed at $2,977.99. And before you have a stroke, this is actually lower than the 1,000K, like the 1K tray price. Like when we saw this announced, it was you buy 1,000 units, they're $3,000 each, and people were estimating all the way up to like $4,000 for a single CPU. And here it is on Newegg for the same as the tray price, actually slightly less.
Well, as far as we know.
Yeah.
Yeah, none of this really matters till one's available to buy.
I guess. I mean, I'm hopeful that that actually is accurate. not hopeful because I plan on buying one, but I'm just like from a journalistic standpoint, being able to like say like this is sold and shipped by Newegg. This is not some third party who was trying to take people's money for a product they couldn't actually buy. I don't imagine Newegg just creates product listings on a whim. And being somebody who's followed like more expensive and impossible to buy Intel products, like back when the X25M SSD was something that I was like constantly checking for on Newegg, and it was like $600 for an 80 gigabyte SSD, I think at the time. I finally bought one when it went down to 300. Like these product listings show up and then they're out of stock, auto notify, and then like a random like dozen will come into stock and immediately sell out because everybody's been auto notified. So anyway, I just thought it was interesting that they said absolutely this will only be available from integrators, and then here it is on Newegg, even though you can't buy it.
And you'll need to spend a lot more than just that $3,000 to get a system up and running, because you need to buy the custom board, custom cooler.
Yeah, I think wasn't some rumors that the motherboard's going to come in at $1,700.
I saw prices, well above, in the 1,500 plus range.
That's ludicrous.
I thought our contact at Intel said it would be $80.
$80.
Yes, I believe that was what he said.
He was talking about his lunch tab.
If you think about it though, like this is all relative. Forget it. Like if you've got the money to buy this CPU anyway, I'm sure you don't really care if the system, like the board, is that much. But you think about it, a $300 CPU often entails a $150 motherboard. So what's the difference? $3,000 CPU, $1,500 motherboard. It makes sense to me.
Yep, keeping everything proportional.
Yeah. How would you feel, Jim, if you bought a $3,000 Xeon and had like this paper thin $80 motherboard that you were trying to stick this thing into? I'd be afraid of damaging my CPU. Honestly, I would need at least $500 underneath that thing to feel safe.
I'd be more concerned about what time my meeting with the divorce attorneys were the next week than that. If I had bought that,
yeah, I mean that would complicate things because you'd have to make decisions about like liquid versus physical assets, distribution of those things and stuff. So, I understand that would be a bit of a roadblock, but we all have to make sacrifices. That's one that I'm willing to make for you. I mean, I'm willing to make that sacrifice for you.
You're gonna make that
I'm
for
not
me.
speaking for myself.
Yep.
Yet. Anyway, Jeremy posted news about it's something that we've been waiting for.
Yes, I mean, if you were a big fan of the Corsair Dominator fan package to put on top of your RAM to cool it off, because obviously RAM is the one heat producing thing in your system that needs to be dealt with, you're going to love Thermaltake's new water RAM. Yes, it is water cooled RAM. It's a kit of 4 DIMMs with screws in them so that you can specifically add into your water cooling loop your RAM.
Isn't that part of a song though? Oh, Black Betty, water RAM. Oh, Black Betty,
water RAM, ma'am.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
I'm curious, and I'm looking on the site here.
I mean, it worked. See, they tested it, so 38.1C without the block, 36.2 just by adding the block in. And when you hook it into a water cooling loop, below 30C. So essentially you're running at about ambient temperature probably, or a little bit over, which of course isn't really going to do anything to your performance. But hey,
I mean, it gives you that headroom if you're overclocking the memory. And that's what I was looking at. I'm looking at the review to see if they like got inside and like looked at the ICs, like what is this using? Apparently it's SK Hynix RAM. It's 3200 megahertz RAM, pretty aggressive timing, CAS 16 at 1618, 1838. XMP profile. You can obviously probably bump that up with some more voltage, but that's the thing. Like you start adding voltage to memory running this fast, you're going to have some heat. So, I mean, a lot of RAM has pretty robust heat sinks these days, but why not just put it underwater?
And to be honest, one thing is looking at it with the water block attached to it, it still takes up less space than some of these bloody fins on the more ostentatious RAM kits.
Yeah, I would say this is slightly more compact than the air cooled solutions? You know, the ones
Oh, definitely.
Corsair has, where you put like the fan shroud over the top of it.
Dominator.
Yep. So interesting. I mean, if you're already liquid cooled or just want something to differentiate yourself the next time you build something to take to QuakeCon, I mean, this is it.
It will look different.
You don't want to be the one that doesn't have the water RAM at your next LAN party. The next story, Jeremy, that you posted that I have here is about a Synology NAS. Jim, is this the same one that you have? The 1819 Plus, or is this a different model?
This is a different one. I reviewed the 1619. It was a 6-bay version. So it might have been the same platform, but just the smaller number of drives.
And the potential storage for this is, of course, outrageous. Now, this 252 terabyte number, that's with the addition of like a second drive unit, right? Like
there's an expansion kit which slaps in another 10 drives.
You can get 2 expansion kits if I remember correctly, and they're 2x4.
Okay.
So yeah, if you put in 12 gig drives,
this will take 14 gig drives, won't it? Or gig,
14?
terabyte, 14 terabyte. Or is
the issue with Synology and all of the NAS makers is that there are file system limitations on volume size. So when you get into some of these, like either giant 12-bay devices, or you start adding on the expansion units and you're using 12 and 14 terabyte drives, you're probably going to hit a limit and you're not going to be able to have it all in a single volume. So you'll have to then, plan your storage to split it up between multiple volumes.
I don't know if I'd want a single volume that was 112 terabytes anyway.
Oh, well, you can't. I think the single is 108 terabytes. Sorry.
Oh, I see that now. Maximum single. Okay. Well, I guess you could use that extra 4 terabytes for like parity or something. I mean, I guess you could have like one. Well, I don't know. There's a lot of different rate options.
Tables and stuff. But the nifty thing about this one is 10 gigabit Ethernet.
That's nice.
And so that's what makes this one sort of new. It doesn't come right out of the package. Essentially, it's got a PCIe NIC that you can order. Okay. And it can either be the SFP Plus or RJ45 if you like the old style. And the highest one is a PCI 3.0 by 8 paired 10 gigabit E network connection, which is for files of this size. Like if you've got this much storage, it's going to be bloody painful if you're just doing a single gigabit connection. Like it's just not going to work. But you slap this thing into it, and all of a sudden you can have a lot of people connecting to this simultaneously, and it ain't going to care at all.
Yeah, and all of these products too, they all have multiple gigabit NICs built in, and you can do like link aggregation.
Yes.
But you introduce a lot of requirements down the chain. Like your switch has to support, is it 802?
Oh yeah,
802.3 AD, or there's protocols. And I had bought some enterprise level Cisco stuff that I thought had it and didn't end up having it. So and then you got to set up like VLANs and stuff. So there's a lot of requirements just to being able to have that option to have the PCI Express slot, throw in the card. When I tested the smaller version of this, you don't need to buy, like they do sell you a card. We got those Intel X540 10 gig RJ45 cards. It works with that plug and play. So you just install it and you can go. And then there's I had a QNAP card, a QNAP branded NIC that worked in there as well. So a lot of options for expandability.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, this isn't something you're going to plug and play because like pretty much just the bare bones setup is a grant. And that has an immense amount of RAM. I'm just trying to find where it was. There it is. So it comes with 4 gigs of RAM. You can upgrade that to 32 gigs, but that will cost you almost $700.
You know what? That's not really true. Because the last Synology, I think the previous version of this, which has the 4 1 gig like and stuff, you could buy some some Micron memory, and we put in 2x16 gig SO-DIMMs in there, and it worked.
And instantly voided your warranty.
Yeah. No, not really. You just take off the case and
I don't know about this particular model but again, the sister model of this that I reviewed has a door with SO-DIMMs right accessible there.
Really?
So you don't have to buy they're not Apple. You don't have to buy the RAM from the factory up front.
I manually upgraded a Thecus NAS a few years ago, and that was the same story. Like, you had to take the whole thing apart, and I don't remember if there was a sticker or not that I had to get past, but you could replace the DIMMs. Like, there was 2 DIMM slots and just had one populated, or the SO-DIMMs, I should say.
yeah.
I see one more story on here I'm not familiar with. Who added this? Was this you, Jeremy? It said Canada on it.
Yeah. I had to make sure that people were aware of it, and I decided not to post a full news review of it, but I will quickly cover that. As bad as the States is for your net neutrality and just general assery of your communications companies, they have yet to be caught trying to ban VPNs. Bell Canada wanted, as part of the new trade agreement, to ban the use of VPNs in any case in which they might be used to get the American Netflix. So, it's just that they literally don't grasp the whole, companies use VPNs? What? So if you ever see that being argued, you can blame us because we started it. Sorry about it.
Because we have a satellite office in Calgary. Did we have VPN network to 100% of the time?
Yeah.
So they connect to our corporate network.
To watch Netflix, right?
No.
Yeah.
That's for bad.
It's actually to view out-of-market MLB games.
Oh, that would also be true.
That's why you subscribe to MLB.TV. Or what is it called? MLB at Bat?
No, but they block you out if you're in the...
that's right.
Wise.
Yeah, okay. You're talking about watching in-market games.
Right. Well, out of... when I meant out of, like, the games you're not supposed to be able to watch.
Yeah.
Which up here is anything that doesn't feature Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta support your team. I mean, it's
not my team.
Matter of pride.
Wrong coast.
Yeah, in geography is not one of my strong points.
Still bitter about the loss of the Expos.
Yeah. I mean, they're still there. They're just in Washington now. Nationals.
Yeah.
Go USA. But
anyway,
still haven't re-signed Bryce Harper, who is still a free agent, as we move on to the sports portion of our podcast today. Where do you think he's going to end up? We're going to take some calls. All right. So let's go to picks of the week. And I see that all of us have a pick, starting with Jim.
All right. Yep. So mine is it's a humble bundle that is for Paradox Interactive. So a lot of really great strategy games. I know Josh likes some of their games he's talked about in the past, and this one is it's pretty good for a dollar, or a dollar or more. You get Crusader Kings 2, Age of Wonders, Darkest Hour, Magicka. I actually haven't played Magicka, but the others are pretty good. But then if you go to, I guess it's at the average of 642, you get Crusader Kings 2, Age of Wonders 3, Europa Universalis 4, and then really at $12 though you get Steel Division, some extra DLC for some of the games. Steel Division's great. I've been playing that not so much recently, but right after it came out, I played it quite a bit. So this is for $12 or more. If you add more for charity, you get quite a good selection of games. So check that out if you're into strategy, or that style of strategy games.
Is Steel Division strategy, or is that the picture makes it look like a shooter?
No, it's a strategy. It's sort of a top-down real. Well, it's turn-based,
isn't it?
In terms of setting up your units, and then it plays out in real time. Or not, accelerated real time, I guess.
So it's like Valkyrie Chronicles. Or is that what that one's called?
No, because that's you control Valkyria.
Like it's still turn-based, but yeah, you're right. It's like over the shoulder shooting, and then you have to wait your turn to move again.
With the most bizarre cover system in the world.
Yes. Yes. Jeremy, you're up.
So if you don't want to be playing games taking place in historical times, how about historical games? The Ancestor bundle over on Fanatical is $2 frickin'. You get System Shock 1. You get System Shock 2.
Ooh.
You get Metal Fatigue. And I have no mouth and must scream. I have never actually played Shadow Man or Strife, and I don't really remember Spirit Xanadu much. But for $2, just bloody well get it. System Shock 2 has been sort of redone on the Source engine, and so it will look much better now that you own it on Steam. And there's a ridiculous amount of mods out for it. The System Shock 1 is enhanced, but it's still a little pixely because, good lord, the thing is ancient. It is also one of the very first-person shooters that you needed to use a brain for. I'd highly recommend them all, unless you literally don't have $2, in which case, I'm sorry to hear that.
That you're like cheaper than GOG prices now. I know System Shock is on GOG. I don't know if System Shock 2 is. I imagine so.
It is
$2 though.
Yeah. Buy it, give the key away to someone you like if you already have it.
All right, Josh.
Me. If you don't like putting people in arm bars, then why don't you get a USB bar? Samsung Bar Plus 128 gig drive, only $26.
Look at those speeds.
Megabytes per second.
Say that again. I was talking over you.
300 megabytes per second USB.
How fast is it, Josh?
It's around 300 megabytes per second read.
All right.
Writes are probably going to be slower.
Oh, it's X-ray proof so that you can't.
It is X-ray proof. That's what I was just about ready to say. It's all metal. You can X-ray it, and you'll just see a bar of metal.
What do you think of the industrial design?
I think it's handy. It feels good in your hand. You flip it up in the air, and it lands with a nice solid thud wherever it lands.
Which way you should be putting it when you insert it.
Yeah, you have no confusion about certain things. And you can put a key ring in it. So there you go. $26 for 128 gigs of pretty fast flash.
That sounds awesome.
It saved every one of us.
Speaking of savings, and I'm annoyed looking at the screen right now because I didn't realize this was actually cheaper, but the pick that I have is not $26. It's expensive, but it's not super expensive for what it is. It's a mirrorless camera. I had resisted the mirrorless camera trend. It's sweeping the nation. Basically, it's been like the camera of choice for a lot of people who do like video work and photography and want something that's more compact. And I'm the one who totes around like a DSLR and just something that's smaller that you can take to like trade shows or do video with is appealing. And normally this thing's like $650 with the kit lens. This actually it looks like it's basically the camera back price for the whole thing is what they're selling it for on Amazon now. So it's like $600, but not inexpensive. But compared to a DSLR, it's kind of like in that entry level DSLR price point. I will say this camera produces extremely good images. Seems to have, even with the kit lens, good sharpness, not a lot of distortion, takes very good video, has a very sensitive sensor. It's a 24.3 megapixel camera. Not perfect, but it works for my needs. And
you get 3 months of Creative Cloud. Well, the photography plans. I guess that's Photoshop and Lightroom.
Probably.
Apparently with this one you do.
3 months for free.
When you get it at Best Buy, apparently you don't.
Well, there you go.
I paid $650 for it, and I don't think I got anything for free at all. But yeah, I mean, apparently
on the plus side, you're not getting emails from Adobe now.
That's true. But
and you're actually your video right now is coming through this card.
Correct. This is the A6000. I have it plugged into an HDMI capture device, and I'm actually using the camera to do the podcast. I'm like, hey, if I just get like an external power thing, so I don't run out of battery halfway through the podcast, can I just use this as a webcam? And the lens I'm using is actually another Sony lens. It was a separate purchase, but for about the same price as my go-to Nikon micro 40mm lens that I use for everything, that almost all the photos you see on the website that I've taken in the last 4 years have used this lens. I got a 50mm prime lens with a very quiet, very quick autofocus that makes it ideally suited to video. And I have it stopped all the way down to 1.8 right now, which means, if I were to move out of frame, then the card in the background would go into focus. Now, if it focuses back on me, like everything behind me is now super blurry, and I don't even have that much light in here, and there's plenty of light for video. So
we should point out, if you've been watching the stream, you've probably noticed that Sebastian's video has been glitching out the whole stream.
Yes,
and that's not the camera's
recommendation
fault.
for this camera.
No, that's the fault of the interface, the HDMI capture he's using.
Yeah,
that Alan
not the highest. And I bet, actually, now that I think about it, I did not adjust the frame rate of the camera manually, so I probably need to set it to 60, because if it's at like 125, it's probably freaking the capture device out. So anyway, that's my pick. Anybody got anything else? Crickets. Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, this has been the PC Perspective Podcast. Check us out at PCPer.com. Read the full review of the Radeon VII if you haven't already. Check out all the benchmarks there. More to come, by the way, with that. There's a lot more to test. I'm sure there'll be some more projects coming. But for now, I want to thank you for listening and or watching, and we'll see you next week.